What's going on, fellas? If you can tell from the title, we got a fun one today. I was trying to think. I was like, oh, God, I haven't posted in a little bit. I gotta come up with a topic for a video and put something out there. One is falling into my lap today. Magic how these things work. So last night I was doing my mobility. I was doing my meal prep for today. I got a high priority deadlift session this afternoon. So I was prepping and whatnot. And I saw that Bromley had posted a video. And I was like, why you should bounce your deadlifts. It's like a case for touch and go deadlifts. That's something I find very interesting. I know some good deadlifters that will utilize them in their training. I know some good deadlifters that never utilize them. And I thought it'd be interesting to hear Bromley talk about like the use cases specific to touch and go deadlifting, arguments for, arguments against, specificity, blah, blah, blah. I was very keen to listen to it. I was like, that's interesting. Didn't have time because I needed to get to bed on time. Kirsch gets up real early for work. So we had to go to bed as early as we could. So I go to bed and I wake up this morning to people in my Discord telling me that I got to go duke it out with Bromley. We're gonna go full fisticuffs over the efficacy of pausing our bench presses during volume phases or during base building phases or periods of the year where we're looking to grow our overall musculature, to try to make sure we're using terminology that's similar to what Bromley talks about in like that high prioritization of base building. I don't want to have one of those douchey internet discussions where one of us is using like, let's say like conjugate influence vernacular and one of us is kind of using like modern RPE based vernacular and we don't even have a productive discussion because we're not using the same terminology. I'm going to make sure we're on the same base, but we're talking about specifically pausing the bench press when our goal is development of these base qualities. So I don't have the exact exchange, just someone who follows my channel commented, oh, that's interesting that you are kind of saying that touch and go is best suited to these volume phases. I think Sam is also a proponent of this pausing the vast majority of your bench volume type of thing. And I'm going to keep saying the vast majority because there are certain exercises that I absolutely think are better suited to touch and go. The one that I use myself within my own training is a close grip Spoto press. Given that it's primarily aimed at developing the triceps, I really don't see a lot of reason to pause those. So that's something I do within my own training. That's always touch and go. But we're saying the vast majority of our regular bench presses in these base phases. Yeah, I do kind of advocate for those still being paused. We're going to get into some reasons for why later, but somebody goes in the comments of Bromley's video and Bromley sneak dissed me. This is a joke. I like Bromley a lot. This is all tongue in cheek. But Bromley sneak dissed me. He goes, I don't know, man. Every 500 plus bench press Sam has done that I've seen has been touch and go. First of all, I've hit a long pause at 500 on the dot, not the upper ones. Max is making fun of me. He's like, yeah, Bromley's right. If you said about 525, I'm not sure you've done a pause above that. And I would say, you're not wrong. But that being said, I'm not strong enough that anything that starts with a 5, that isn't base building. Like, that's not hypertrophy work. So, I am a big proponent of pausing our base building phase work. And I have the vast majority of my athletes pause the vast majority of that work. So my own ego lifting at the 500 plus mark aside, we're talking more broad, like what I think is best practice type of thing. I'm a fan of it personally. So we're going to get into a couple of talking points here. So I go on to the repost of Bromley's video and I've been told to come duke it out with you. So Bromley replied to me. He had some good points. He goes, I thought the statement, nobody does only pause work, would be pretty non-controversial, but here we are. Curious if all of your work is paused, how long you've done that, and what considerations you make based on a lifter's experience. So, Mr. Bromley, I'm coming at you on this one. You're pulling some trickery. I didn't take qualm with the claim that nobody does all pause work. Although I do think Julius Maddox does. That could very easily be a case of someone being where they are despite, not because of a very specific method. Sure, and that's not the argument I'm making. But that wasn't the claim I was taking gripe with. The part where you said the reps and volume are going to be best suited to touch and go, and that's self-evident. That's more so what I'm taking gripe with. Are there parts of training that are going to be touch and go? Sure. But the idea that these volume phases are best suited touch and go is kind of what I wanted to talk about. Now, is it easier to do these higher volume sets touch and go? Sure. Could we get more weight for our sets of 8, let's say? Sure. But I don't necessarily agree that if we're talking best suited, not meaning ease, we're talking best suited meaning the best training result possible. I would definitely lean towards the most athletes pausing their sets of 8, their sets of 12, their sets of 10, these traditional like base building phases. I usually have my athletes pause them, and I generally see a better result from doing so. Because usually when an athlete gets into bench pressing, I think there's this big miscommunication that can happen, right? You'll see all of these, I've already talked about this, Brahmi might have seen these videos, but you'll see all these very good bench pressers, and they'll talk about the triceps, the lockout, right? Because they're already good bench pressers. They've done a ton of bench pressing in their lives. They have these very developed pectoral muscles. They've got good power off the chest. Just doing their bench press training might be enough stimulus for their power off the chest, for their pectoral development. And then they have to kind of fill in the rest because they get so much momentum from the bottom. Maybe the triceps get underdeveloped, right? Whereas if we take trainees that are newer to the gym, they are not suffering from an excess of power off the chest. Things we can do to bias our training towards the development of that quality, I think are going to be very, very good. It's very rare that I see someone who isn't at least reasonably strong on the bench press having a lockout issue that isn't just them having really poor control of their scaps. Just about everybody that's a newer trainee has a better lockout than they do off the chest strength, and building up the off the chest. That is, to me, a lot of the essence of bringing them from being a beginner to an intermediate to even an advanced bench presser is that specific strength off the chest quality. And this is something that Josh Bryant talks a lot about, is developing that pop off the chest, this rate of force development from the very bottom. And I find that doing our paused work, or doing our volume work with a pause, is one of the most effective ways to develop this quality. Yes, we could use a little bit more weight, and we could, like, I think he mentioned in the video something about how we're kind of syncing up the resistance curve and the strength curve a little bit by doing a touch and go rep, right? We're working to the upper capacities of the upper range of motion, right? Whereas if we pause everything, maybe we're never working to the upper capacities of our strength for the upper half. But if our strength for the upper half isn't the limiting factor, I would rather double down on that bottom half personally. This kind of paradigm is something that I believe it's a video on Steffi Cohn's channel that Dan Green has talked about, which is for the first XYZ bit of training and development of the bench press, it is more centric towards the shoulders and the chest and development of strength in those bottom ranges, right? Because we are using our triceps a bit in day-to-day life. We're not using the pecs that much in day-to-day life. So it's like, okay, first and foremost, we really need to really fill out these areas, which Bromley talked about. I guess I just disagree that because we're looking for both strength and hypertrophy qualities. I think hypertrophy qualities are still going to be very effectively built with a pause. Mr. Bald Omni-Man Paris is more of on the bodybuilding side of things. He really likes pausing, even if the goal is solely hypertrophy. So I'm just going off of his expertise here. I don't think I'm leaving that much on the table by choosing to pause the volume work from a hypertrophy perspective, and from a strength, like a simultaneous strength development perspective, I would rather really bias towards developing that power off the chest. Now, once the athlete gets that quality of being able to generate a pretty good amount of force, even with a heavy weight, out of the bottom of their press, then we can start looking at, like, okay, a greater percentage is going to be touch and go. And like I said, I'm not saying everything is touch and go. I'm not saying I do everything touch and go. But I do think that, like, once they develop that base quality, and the vast majority of people on the internet probably still need to develop that base quality. Once they build up that base quality, we can look at using more touch and go work, because maybe their off the chest is a non-issue at that point. Maybe we can look at directing more of our volume towards our triceps. But early on, following this idea that the biggest lagging part for most beginner to intermittent trainees is the kind of pecs, I would like to take anything we can to leverage towards that. So a quick little wrap up and a side point. The wrap up, I mean, I do believe there are a greater number of good bench pressers than Bromley is suggesting that do pause all of their work, especially if we go to the tested side of powerlifting. You know, we look at the USAPL, IPF branches. There are a good number of coaches producing, I would say, pretty high level results within there that are advocates for doing basically everything with a pause. Max was saying, especially because he is in that sphere as a USAPL competitor type of guy, he sees a lot of people around him do everything with a pause. And there's almost a sentiment among these younger lifters who are inundated with this really high specificity type of mentality, which I know Bromley has critiqued, and rightfully so. That can certainly be taken too far. Specificity should be an ebb and flow with our proximity to competition. It shouldn't be this thing that we jack all the way to the ceiling year round. But among Max's peers, there's a lot of people that would look at someone funny for ever doing a touch and go rep. So I think it's more common than you'd think. I mentioned Julius Maddox, I believe, pauses everything, at least that I've seen. But that aside, that's not really the point. But the wrap-ups, Bromley just asked like a couple of main questions. Is all of your work paused? No. If I was training for competitive powerlifting, I would probably pause year round on anything that was a bench press. As soon as we start getting further away in variation, I've got pretty good power off the chest. I could kind of skew away from my specificity a little bit and use a little bit more touch and go work on maybe a close grip Spoto type of deal. But all of my regular vanilla bench presses would be paused if I was preparing for powerlifting. I'm just a gym ego lifter who's using it for maybe a little bit of tangential help to my overhead. So there's a lot of ego lifting going on there. But I will say, looking back at my training, I've kind of been good and bad about it in the past. And I have taken this approach of touch and going through my volume phases. And I hit all of these good numbers as Bromley would talk about. I think at my best, I did 405 for like a set of 12 on the bench press for my volume phase, which is far more than I had ever done pause. I think at that period of time, the most I had done with a pause at 405 was like 8 or 9. So I'm getting in this extra volume, which is purported to be the benefit of this touch and go work. And those rep PRs that I was hitting ended up translating less cleanly to a 1RM. And that's something I will often see with my athletes is when they touch and go their way through a volume phase, they hit these inflated rep PRs, which you could argue that those are better for hypertrophy. You could argue that they aren't. I know Paris kind of falls on the side of, I don't think they are that much better. And that's not really here nor there for me, but I do see that people won't get this clean correlation from improvements in touch and go performance metrics to their upper end bench, whereas improvements in paused volume metrics seem to a lot more linearly correlate with increases in upper end strength. That's exactly what I saw myself. So to say that I've always paused all my stuff would be a flat out lie. I've tried to push and chase numbers through touch and go, and I didn't see it translate to those upper end qualities as much as when I did a little bit less reps, but of a higher rep quality with pauses. That correlated a lot better for me. So I think the fact that it's not what I've done almost gives me a little bit extra room to speak on all of my best training cycles are when I leaned towards this approach of pausing all the way through. Even if my goal was to prepare a touch and go 1 rep max, I would still probably pause my hypertrophy or my base phase, just based on what I've observed from myself and my athletes. Now, Bromley's observed something different, and that's totally fine. He's coached plenty of people to draw conclusions past that are completely independent of mine, and that's totally fine. But I'm here to tell you guys that from what I've seen, people will hit these big inflated total volume markers, and it just doesn't seem to have the level of correlation and prediction for a good strength phase and a good peaking phase that I would like to see. So no, I haven't paused everything I've ever done, but the longer and more experience I gained, the more I wish I had, frankly. And then what considerations would you make on a lifter's experience? That's a super good question. That's one of the things I really like about Bromley is his constant mentioning of use cases. I almost have it reversed from what he's speculating, which is, newer lifters need to just put in all this volume. That's best suited touch and go. I almost think of it the other way. Newer lifters really need to develop their pecs and their bottom end strength. They should pause everything. And then as you develop that good bottom end strength, we almost earn the right to start working on more touch and go work because we have that great power off the chest. And most good benchers do get that quality, and then they can start bifurcating outward. And that's kind of, I guess that's a difference in how I see it. Now, the little aside note here is you guys need to stop being so hard on my boy Bromley, man. I say he's been getting it on Reddit. He's been getting it in the YouTube comments. For some people, for some reason, a lot of people really like to hate on the guy. He seems like a nice guy to me. He's the first to admit he's just playing the game a little bit. It's like you got to stand on some hills or die on some small hills, make some statements, get some views. The man's got a house. The man's got a family. Let him play the game a little bit. I don't know why people are shitting on Bromley so much. Like, do I agree with everything Bromley says? No, I think there's some nuance in like the one I didn't agree with his squat accessory tier list. That was the one, like lots of Bromley stuff. I think we all kind of gravitate towards these same general conclusions. That one I didn't agree with. That's totally fine though. He's putting out free information, provided for his family. Let the man play the game a little bit. God damn.